Welcome to the CIO Evolution. In this podcast, we'll explore the Chief Information Officer's role in executing a new ongoing leadership imperative, digital transformation that promotes agility and resilience. How do CIOs upgrade legacy networks? What are the financial challenges CIOs face? And what are the security measures that are required in the new work from anywhere, mobile and cloud-based world?
Hello, I'm your host, Christopher Jablonski. Last week in San Francisco, on the final day of the RSA Conference, Nat Smith, Senior Director of Product Management at Zscaler, joined me to talk about the top issues and ideas from the latest installment of the industry's premier cybersecurity event, along with the announcement between Zscaler and Google, and his take on recent Zscaler acquisitions. Prior to joining Zscaler, Nat was a Vice President Security Analyst in the Technology and Service Provider Division of Gartner, researching emerging technology and trends for technology product leaders for a period of 5 years.
Nat, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me. I'm grateful to have an opportunity to share some of the things I saw and pass along a couple thoughts.
Yes, we are honored that you're with us. Let's jump right in. You are currently in product management. Tell us about the products that you are managing at Zscaler and how your background plays into that. Just as a side note, Nat was a Gartner analyst for some time and had many roles across the industry in networking and security.
Well, currently I work on what we would call our core products. That's where we see most of the customers. It's also where we started. Our main cloud-based proxy, we sell that as a secure web gateway, Zscaler Internet Access, as well as kind of reversing it and doing that for Zero Trust Network Access, so giving access into private apps you can't route to otherwise, and that's our Zscaler Private Access. Great names and things. And then we've expanded off of that and we get the Zscaler experience, so looking at the individual user experience as they're going through. These are the pieces that fit into the core products, cybersecurity, a bunch of other things that go in there. And that really works well. I come from a security background, working with firewall companies, IPS, a lot of the networking side of things, and that eventually led me to Gartner, and that was a wonderful opportunity. At Gartner, you get to speak with clients that are absolutely brutally honest about where their problems are, where they're thinking and things, and I never saw that as a vendor prior working with customers and things, and I love that perspective. And then just the nature of how Gartner's business works, you get to see so many perspectives every day walking through things. It lets you kind of open your eyes to see things. Not very easy to get into any kind of group think, and that's positive. That lets you see some of the new patterns evolve. Highly collaborative environment there as well. The analysts, I don't know if that's obvious from the outside, but the analysts really interact a lot with each other. Almost all of the analysts have been remote even before the pandemic. Right. And in order to have any kind of company culture, if you will, amongst the analysts, you have to reach out and work with each other. So lots of sharing, lots of fighting, debating, if you will, as well, in a healthy, fun way usually.
So that's fascinating. Number one, you bring an outside-in perspective into product management, whereas maybe some of your peers might be people who came in, through the ranks from within Zscaler. And then number two, you have the core platform as your scope, right? You're looking at everything. So what advantage would you say being a Gartner analyst in your previous life brings to figuring out at the platform level how we should be evolving our technologies and what other capabilities within Zero Trust we should be adding?
So there's already a lot of smart people at Zscaler, and I'm definitely not smarter or bringing something that was never there before, but I tend to lean back on the perspective of what's going on in the big picture, not focused on some of the immediate needs or potential customer concerns or something goes wrong during deployment and trying to figure out and take care of that customer quickly. I'm looking at competitive movements. I'm really looking for new opportunities, new ways to use things. So the use case is a great tool. Hey, we used the product and we did this. I go, wow, we've never thought about it that way, and kind of think through how would that work and what could we do to make that better. That's something that just comes directly from being an analyst and sort of thinking in that mindset. And so I embrace that as much as I can for the time being.
And we're going to talk about some of those capabilities that Zscaler has recently added via acquisition. There were some announcements this week and in previous months. But first, we are at RSA, so let's dive into that topic. You've given presentations at the Zscaler booth. I was there for one of them. A lot of people, great work. You've been meeting with customers and so on. Without mentioning AI, because I think that's a topic that's been covered thoroughly, unless you have a very unique perspective, which you're always welcome to share with us. But what are some of the key memories you're going to have and some of the important ideas you're going to take out of this event and put it into practice later?
Well, I have mixed feelings about conferences. I love them on one hand because you get to see people that you've worked with through the years, and maybe they're at different companies, but everybody tends to come, and so it's a little bit of a reunion, and that's great from a vendor perspective. But I also have felt, particularly as an analyst in the years past, when I would attend a conference to try to dig in and figure out what's of value, what was really new, what was exciting or interesting. Is there something that's being missed at the time by analysts? And so I've kind of, as I've had the opportunity to walk around a little bit, think about things on those terms. And from my perspective, I don't see any one theme that's necessarily emerging to the top and saying, wow, everybody's jumping on and grabbing this. For example, maybe 2 or 3 years ago at shows like RSA or even at Black Hat, everybody was XDR everywhere. I don't think that was really happening last year. It felt like it was a little bit of a lull. And I think this year, there's nothing that anybody's really gravitating to. And so as I'm walking by and having conversations, I'm trying to figure out, well, what's the talk? What's interesting? And you already mentioned AI, and you're right, AI is not just here in security, it's in all aspects of business. Even the movies are doing a lot of AI and things now too, and scary things and cool, fun things. But I think that the security market is starting to mature a little bit from I'm using AI to drop it as a buzzword into everything that I'm saying, to I'm starting to figure out, how can I make this practical? It's not just look, we have AI and you should buy us. It's, we're doing something and we're using AI to enable it. And the best vendors that are doing those sorts of things can show something truly new, going back to this use case, something that is very valuable, at least to their target audience, if you like, and say, this is only possible because we are using generative AI to help you set up and configure things. That's something very common. You see the co-pilots and other sorts of conversations that are going. And it's not just the name dropping now. We've had a good year of companies dropping names and trying to develop, and things have been in market for at least half a year or so. And so it's actually starting to work, and it's becoming a little more interesting. I like and I've seen this in a couple of different ways, but either attack path simulation or threat analysis, and you see it from a cloud perspective of where do you have open connections to the internet. You see it in workload and services with third-party code or open source code, where you have companies that are sitting there and able to look through all of those pieces. Looking through individuals, not so hard, but looking through at scale, so hundreds, thousands, and out multiple levels, and bringing this back together and saying, here's what's most important. That's some of the things that we see AI enabling. I even saw one vendor that was looking at user access, so at identity, and saying, well, this user has admin access to this system and that system and that system, and they could start to chart a map of where you could actually get to if that user was compromised, and kind of funnel that back into, I'm going to call it a view of what's important, how risky, how vulnerable, however you want to bring those things up. But it wasn't hard to make those individual connections, but to do it at scale and bring it back to help the operator figure out what's the most important thing to look at. I think that's kind of cool. Operations is not sexy usually, I think, from a marketing perspective, but it's massive as far as, did I get something done? Can I reliably and repeatably do this over and over again? That makes a big difference, I find, to organizations. And whether it's a CISO or a CIO, being able to repeatably stay on top of the work that's there and hopefully get ahead of it even, I think that's the great promise of AI. It's real, it's touchable, tangible, we can get there.
So would you say that if you aggregate all these gains from a business perspective, are we seeing a sea change in scale, in consolidation, in costs? Like, where are we going to see the benefits first from the highest level?
I think we're going to see it in terms of quantity of work that we're able to get done. And whether you want to measure that as a cost or as a time kind of a metric, I think that's where we're going to see things first. And I suspect in the next year or so, and we start to string multiple small things together, and we can get to very complex and very almost starting to feel like artificially intelligent kinds of systems. And I wish you could see my air quotes and my facial expression to go along with that, because there's a little cynicism there in my...
Well, at that point, would you say that we will have caught up with the evil AI, right? Because they're pushing the envelope pretty fast. I witnessed a panel yesterday with executives from SANS talking about deep fakes, talking about how quickly the attacks on the AI side could outstrip how fast we're defending, right? As an industry, we could come together and perhaps match that threat.
I don't know. I think, I don't know that we need to measure things at an industry level. I think it's more interesting at an organizational level. It's much like a thief looking at cars. If you got two cars and one's locked and one's unlocked, they'll probably go after the unlocked car first. And so, or you may have heard you're with your friend in the woods hiking and all of a sudden there's a bear. And you look over at your friend and you say, "What are you doing?" And he's putting on his shoes and going, "I'm going to run out of here. The bear's going to run much faster." And you go, "I don't have to run faster than the bear. I only have to run faster than you." Yeah, I think that kind of dynamic really comes into play here. And just a few notches, an incremental improvement over what is average for your peers, or maybe even just across the market, I think can make a pretty massive difference. And I don't know that the industry is ever going to get very good at measuring that, incremental difference from your peers. But I think that's kind of important, except for, a few things, like maybe some governments and things. There's no peer to a government when you have another nation state coming after them. So that's going to be tough. But in my experience, governments are also fairly well funded on these things. So they're better than the average business organization on protecting themselves.
That's right. You mentioned earlier threat path or threat analysis, attack path simulation, all enhanced by AI. But was there anything else that you saw on the showroom floor, whether it's some initiatives or new startups, that made you pause and think that maybe this is a beacon for something net new coming down the road?
I did take a little gander at some of the quantum encryption. We've heard rumblings of this. I read something about a year ago with some simulations in China and how they could crack quantum encryption, and it was only in theory. You could crack it if you had actually the compute necessary to do it, which didn't exist at the time. But I think that that's something we need to be a little more prepared for. It's a completely different methodology of encrypting. And the exposure that we'll potentially have right now, I encrypt something, and if it's out in the cloud and nobody else has the key for it, I don't really care because it's not accessible, but that could change. And the flip side of things, how we do encryption today, and by the way, that's a big part at Zscaler. It's not fun and exciting, but the ability to decrypt 100% of all the traffic that comes reliably around the world. We talked in the booth, so it's kind of top of mind, but Zscaler's clearing out over 320 billion transactions a day. So decrypting, actually being able to do the inspection and turning it around. And you go 320 billion, that's a big number. Yeah. How big? What is it in the scheme of things? Well, Google's doing 15 to 16 billion transactions a year. So this is on order of 20 times more than what Google is doing. And Google does different things. I'm not suggesting that Zscaler is necessarily bigger, but we take that for granted. Every device that we have is able to encrypt our traffic, and almost all the traffic is encrypted. So encryption's a really important part of the way the world works. And if there's suddenly this new way that things are going to be done, and not only does that new way make it much tougher to, first of all, happen, there's going to be a much higher compute requirement and things, but it also brings the capability of being able to decrypt everything that we've had in place. We are going to obsolete everything that we have almost instantaneously when that technology becomes accessible, cheap enough for companies to use.
Yeah, it sounds like a paradigm shift is coming with quantum encryption, and especially at the intersection of AI. And I have no idea what that's going to look like. I'm sure we're going to see vendors talking about what that looks like down the road, right? Smarter
AI, or AI accelerating some of these other things, finding a few shortcuts that could use some of the existing affordable technology to speed things up.
So Nat, you mentioned earlier both Google and Zscaler, and coincidentally there was a press release that I saw around Chrome Enterprise partnering up with Zscaler. Have you had a chance to take a look at what that is and what the significance is of this for not just end users who have Chrome Enterprise, but for Google, and what is also in it for Zscaler?
So our announcement was that we are working with Google, particularly the Google Chrome Enterprise browser, and we're today completely compatible and work together. And in the future, we're going to continue to build that relationship. So some of the pieces that would have been maybe as a Zscaler client or agent that would sit on a laptop could just be part of Chrome, kind of built in there and ready to go. And I don't think that necessarily replaces the agent and things that we're using as much, but as an example, one of the early use cases that looks really promising is third parties, contractors and the like, who maybe need access into some of your systems, but they're not going to use your equipment, your laptop. You're not going to manage them. They're going to use their own things. So unmanaged access into your systems. And how do you simplify and make that easier? There's ways to do that today. We do that all the time. But this is something that could be potentially almost ready to go. Almost everybody has Chrome on laptops and things. It seems to be the browser that is the most compatible with services, particularly private services and some of the older ones. I find myself swapping back to Chrome all the time as I'm accessing even some of our own internal Zscaler apps, just because it's smoother, it loads better, it renders the way that I'm expecting it to. And so this, I think, is going to be just a shortcut, make things a little bit easier and things for that. And it also opens things up very easily for everybody else that Google sells to flip the switch and poof, Zscaler's working for them.
Well, in your opinion, do you think this is a trend where more of the technology for security and zero trust starts to get embedded across more like mainstream services and products and starts to disappear more, so it's more of a seamless experience and pretty much invisible?
I think that the end users don't notice today what's in place very much. So that's one of the hallmarks of the Zscaler private access is you don't have to log in, and you can combine it with single sign-on, so the user opens up their laptop in the morning, signs in, and it already connects things. And it's not like a VPN client where, oh gosh, I'm going to go get that system, so I have to launch a separate VPN client and make that connection and go. It's done in the background, and so things like mounting drives or other sorts of things just boom, 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 pop up seamlessly, and there's no change to what the user would do whether they were in an office or outside of an office. It just kind of comes together. That's probably something that Zscaler undersells quite a bit. The fact that it's just seamless and easy, and there's no change to the worker's motion. They don't have to learn how to do something new. It just happens for them. So I can see that. There's a lot of excitement with some of these enterprise browsers. There's there was a fairly big acquisition from Palo Alto Networks acquiring Talon. Island is coming on strong. They've got a strong voice, and they're very aggressive in marketing and sales and things. And so you hear a lot of things about them. I'm not completely convinced that this form factor of an enterprise browser goes out and replaces, for example, endpoint protection like CrowdStrike or Microsoft Defender, even though that's some of the things that these vendors claim that they can do, and even very close into our area where that form factor would, and by the way, the stack and everything else they have replaces the whole security services edge, SSE market, or even SASE, which are things that they would love to be able to do and they claim that they can do. It feels a little bit, the incremental, and I don't even think that it's a benefit in all cases, but the potentially incremental benefit of trying to do this on a browser has some downsides. Now I have the compute, I've got other, more of a pull on the endpoint. Like I mentioned before, I like Chrome. I end up having to switch to it a lot of times, but as my laptop slows down and I notice, gosh, I've got 15 Chrome windows open, and I look and see and go, wow,
right.
That's eating the life out of my laptop as well. So
and they all have their own plugins and extensions, right? And the load just grows.
The more functionality that you bring in there, the more pull and drag that it has. And laptops keep on getting better compute, more memory and things, but I don't know. It doesn't feel like relying on somebody else to do that is one of the best ways. And most of these vendors already have cloud-based systems to support things like a sandbox, which would just swamp a laptop or a mobile phone or something like that. And I go, well, why would you switch everything to unproven cloud service? Maybe sometimes there's a benefit on doing things locally. I don't know. I don't see it as a big benefit. I see some niche opportunities where that can fit in. So it'd be wise to have the flexibility to deploy in multiple ways, which is really, by the way, what we're doing with Google is we're not signaling that we're going to switch everything and it's a new direction for Zscaler. We're saying here's some additional ways to deploy and get value out of there.
Well, speaking of additional ways to deploy and expanding the discussion around agents and endpoints, last month Zscaler acquired Airgap Networks for enterprise IT and OT environments. Let's pick up where you're going with discussion now and add in what are the implications of going with Airgap in our environment. I hear a lot about east-west connectivity, agentless. Sounds fascinating. There's a lot of excitement around it.
All right. Well, just to set the base, if you've never heard of Airgap before, I think this is not how Airgap would describe themselves, but I think this is the simplest way to explain the value. If you are looking to do microsegmentation in an office, in a branch office, this is a tool that will overlay on top of what you already have and put it in place. So you don't have to make any changes. You don't have to change out your network, change out equipment or anything like that. It's an overlay, pops in place, and can give you that benefit very quickly. And the alternative way to do this is either use subnet or VLAN everything in a location so the networking becomes really, really complex and quite honestly brittle. Or you try to put firewalls everywhere and you run into kind of the same step. You're just artificially segmenting everything with firewalls, and the configuration of that becomes difficult because now you have to worry, can I route things to the right locations? This overlay requires no agents. It's simply replacing the DHCP service. You don't even have to displace it. It's just kind of a proxy sitting in between, much like Zscaler is a proxy when you speak to the internet. You're not replacing the internet, you're just going through a service. And Airgap makes one really important change as DHCP. And just so you know, DHCP is the process when any kind of a device logs into a network, we'll consider this a local area network, it needs to have an identity to speak on the network. It gets its IP address. And it's told, how do you talk on the internet? On the network itself, not the internet. That's what you really accomplish with DHCP. And there's the change that's being made is as the address gets sent back to the device registering on, it's told that the network, and this is no change to any of the specifications of the network, but it's told that the network is essentially very, very small, a /32 network, which means the device knows how to talk to itself, which kind of seems funny, but that's actually really important. And then it knows how to speak to a gateway. And guess who becomes the gateway? This is the Airgap service becomes the gateway. And so every communication that any device would have goes through this gateway. No agents required. We're just following the regular protocols that have been in place for the last 30, 40 years of networking, just following the standards. We're just changing how the endpoints look at that network. Now, and I can say this without breaking confidentiality because Airgap is now part of Zscaler. But as a Gartner analyst, I spoke to Airgap several times over the years, and I hadn't seen anything else like that. And I loved the fact that there was no agents required to put out, or like and agents for Illumio or Guardicore, which is now part of Akamai, or Color Tokens or vArmor. Those are kind of the regular candidates for this agent-based microsegmentation. And then you look at Cisco with Tetration and some of the ACI sets up, and even VMware a little bit on, we're going to just change the way the network goes. And there's a lot of complexity when you start to try to change the network. And if you have to put yet another agent on every device, that's also kind of, it's a little bit of a hindrance. And if you don't have the agent there, then you're also completely blind and you have no control. So that part's not so good. This way, it is reworking. I mean, it's working with the infrastructure, the existing piece, but you don't have to make any changes, and that's a huge selling point. So I asked them, because I'm trying to find out, how do we break this? You know, it seems so simple. There must be like a lot of holes in the system. And I said, what if I bring in a rogue device and plug this into the local area network and say, don't just ignore whatever the DHCP server says as far as how the network looks. You can communicate to anybody you want to. You can just start sending things off. And I said, you wouldn't be able, Airgap, you wouldn't be able to stop that at all. And they go, you're right, we wouldn't be able to stop that. And I felt like I was getting trapped. I mean, I could tell. He's like, you're right, you know, like leading you where he wants to go. And I go, so I could do a scan and start to see things. And he goes, you could. And then I find something, I could start to attack him. And he goes, how's that going to work? And I go, what do you mean? He goes, so you can talk directly to them and not go through the Airgap gateway. I go, right. What does the target that you're going to, what does that device think the network's like? I go, oh, it's a /32. So the response coming back to the attack is going to go back through the gateway, and they got you.
Stuck.
They recognize, you know, they see it. They found the communication. They can just cut it off right there. So it's a really clever way to make use of things. I'm super excited to see this play out. We've had, and Zscaler, by the way, is the largest ZTNA, which is Zero Trust Network Access, the largest vendor for this in the world. It's not even close, number two. Like, you probably add 2, 3, and 4 together and still not be as many customers, as much business as Zscaler does with this. When the pandemic happened, this was a great time and place. Zscaler was ready for things. Yeah. Hey, we've got a system, it's cloud-based, we can connect you, we can do it in a way that's way safer than just VPNs, which are also reliant largely on hardware. There's ways to do it in the cloud, but right time, right place. And companies loved the concept of ZTNA, and they would call into Gartner often and say, we're starting to have employees come back into the office. And when everybody was remote, we had zero trust. We had isolation for everything. It was great. We felt really good about things. And now that we're back in the office networks tend to be relatively flat. And so it's kind of backwards. Yeah. You think, I'm in the office and I control all the network and everything, but the reality is the network is really open, and so the isolation, the zero trust aspect of it has gone away, and they started to think, why don't we just use ZTNA in the office? And I go, it would be better than how we have things set up right now where anybody can talk to anybody. And that's where this concept of universal ZTNA was born. And there is one probably important change that most organizations would do. ZTNA, the user looking to connect to some service, needs to go through a cloud-based broker. if that service happens to be in the same network, so the same location as where the user is, going out to the internet and then back in, that doesn't feel like a really good experience or a good user.
This is the ZPA use case right here.
This is ZPA. But so what we do is we just pull in that broker, that ZTNA broker, and we call it a private service edge here at Zscaler, but we can pull that local, so it doesn't even have to go outside. And your configurations don't change, whether the user's in the office, whether they're home, whether they're traveling. It goes. That's an example of operationally, you've made the world easy for me.
Yeah.
Now we can take that same theme of operationally making things easier and say, here's your office. We can also turn around and segment things that would not normally be part of a ZTNA environment, like IoT devices, maybe even OT devices if we're talking about factories. And there's ways to bring in ZTNA and make that happen. But this is a really clever way of isolating them within the office. A slightly different use case, but a lot of overlap in the value.
So is the advantage here, and I'm trying to figure out like who would be the ideal customer profile for this capability, and maybe you have an answer, whether it's by industry, org size, environment. How do you put it all together to make a statement about the maturity of zero trust when you add in Airgap? Is it for the highest levels where you're looking for the pinnacle of segmentation in your environment and you really want to do role-based access and you really want to enforce policy at the most granular scale, or is there something else here that has the greatest value proposition?
So I would place this as a phase 2 kind of an approach, but interestingly enough, it might actually be easier on the configuration and setup and things than phase 1 was. If phase 1 is my crown jewels, the most important things, I am putting that behind, for us, it's the Zscaler Private Access, ZPA or ZTNA kind of protection, and I'm protecting the most important things. This is saying, now I can isolate and protect everything. So I kind of expand it. And you'll be, and zero trust in this aspect is a case of isolating and keeping things separate. This is very similar to microsegmentation, so you're kind of keeping things separate, but this is ability to go across and capture everything with very minimal configuration.
Yeah.
So I think it's a phase 2. I think it's going to be a natural evolution. And if you include that with our new Zero Trust SD-WAN, which, by the way, is also really similar to a lot of our ZPA, so that's the ZTNA technology, you can start to just truly get rid of that firewall, potentially get rid of the router that's sitting there. Sometimes that's CPE equipment for your network, but with the network provider, but you're not needing to manage the rules, things like BGP and stuff. You don't have to worry about all of those bits, because if you're in a position where some of these offices, and particularly small offices, really don't have a use case for things from the outside world coming to them, except for explicit services and things that you as a company would want to push in, there's no need to be open to the world. Let's just close it off. A default deny for everything that goes in place. And that's exactly what we're doing. We're basically saying, hey, the office is kind of like the crown jewel. And so just like ZTNA would protect and make it so you can't even see it, there's no way to attack it if you can't see it.
Yeah.
We're doing that for the office. And so now we're expanding that in the office, starting to isolate and segment. That's why it's phase 2, I think.
And then you mentioned SD-WAN. Would the Airgap software be installed on the branch connector?
That's exactly right. There's space to be able to run a small VM today. We might get a little bit tighter on integration in the future.
Yeah.
I'm sure that would make more sense, but no promises in it.
Wonderful. Well, let's attack one more topic, Avalor. Different area. We're talking about unified vulnerability management. They have a patented data fabric for security, and this acquisition happened in March. So I don't know how quickly you could shift gears from the previous discussion, but how does this now help customers more effectively identify vulnerabilities and predict and prevent breaches?
So I think the real value of Avalor isn't the immediate use case of vulnerability management, even though I think there's some coolness and things there. But I think the strategic value, the long-term value, is the concept of a fabric. And I recognize fabric is overused in things. But let's put it in terms of what's exciting in the network today, or not network, but the industry today. everybody likes AI, and everybody knows what AI means. Everybody knows what ML means. Whether or not ML should be part of AI and things, I'll leave it alone. But these are acronyms that now the world knows and understands. And most people, certainly within IT, will have heard of LLM, large language models. And so this concept of AI is awesome, but it's more awesome with more data. And therefore, the best AI comes from places where there's the most data. That starts to, resonate, and I kind of understand. As a matter of fact, when we look at generative AI and we think about, for an organization, where the risks are, I want to participate and be part of this model, but if I have to share my data out there, is there something confidential? Is there something that's important that I really don't want to be shared with anybody else? And that's what we start to worry about. And as businesses look at, well, I have a lot of data. Can I just make my own lake of data, my own model, and start to use this? That's something that we've been doing for years with business intelligence, but now the idea that AI can start to use this in ways that can accelerate some of the things, some of the sophistication in what I was able to do in the past, and it's using my own data. So if it's in a closed system and it's just my own data, I can use technology and be really, really happy and move forward with this. So that sounds great, and you just kind of throw all the data in and it does its thing, and that's a massively oversimplification of what's going on there. Data doesn't just automatically work together without you doing that. And so a fabric is kind of that connective tissue that helps data understand how it could interact with other data. It can, I don't want to say completely normalize data and make it so that it's the same and equivalent and data from different sources and things, but it gives pathways for how they can interact and work together. And that's what Avalor does. That is so awesome. So I spoke earlier about the scale and being able to decrypt 320 billion transactions a day, which is a really, really big number. But think about, without looking at any private information, but just think about the metadata and things that are potentially available from that. And that's exactly what we were thinking at Zscaler. We're going, we have a lot of data access to that we basically just throw on the floor, and it's good practice. If there's not a need for the data, don't hold on to it. That's where we start to get into trouble, when we hold on to things that we don't need. But a lot of our customers would be interested in some of the data that they generate and being able to use their data in a way that can start to connect it to different pieces. This is what Avalor does. And so the threat protection that Avalor puts out was pulling data from multiple sources and having a way to work with it very easily, so you can see what's important, or you can allow data that's from disparate sources, different perspectives, put it in the same context, so they can be worked and used together. We talked quite a bit this week about detection and being able to find some bad thing, and everybody likes to talk about the 0 day, and that's another. It's kind of like zero trust. It's not that there's no trust in zero trust. It's just deliberate, explicit trust. I mean, we grant trust only to where we think we are. We're getting rid of the implicit trust. That's the zero trust idea.
You actually wrote an article about this on CIO Revolutionaries not long ago, right? Defining zero trust.
Yeah. And there's some trust in zero trust. Yeah. It's just we don't give it away without thinking about it. So no implicit trust there. But the 0 days, if we already knew what bad looked like, we can find that. We can do that at scale. It's economical and things to do it. It's when you don't know what bad looks like, so the unknown side of things. And the way that we kind of tickle and trick our way into capturing that is we look at things that are relatively weak signals, clues. This is abnormal. I don't know. Is this like a bad thing, or is this a good thing? For example, the cat that sits in my office, because I'm up here in San Francisco this week, says Monday, he's not here in the office. Is that a good thing or a bad thing? And he's not sure. And you can't tell from there. But if you knew, this abnormality, like, that would have signaled that something bad had happened. That's the same kind of a concept of being able to look at a lot of these smaller pieces and individually not actionable, But as we start to put them into context, which means looking at the same time in the same locale, whether we're talking about being on a network or on a service or something that brings them into the same locale, that gives them something in common. And we look and we say, gosh, there's like 5 of these abnormalities in different ways, looking at different kinds of things. Something is not right there. One of them individually, I wouldn't block things, I wouldn't stop things. But 5 of them, that starts to get the looks like a duck, it talks like a duck, it walks like a duck. It's a duck.
There's some significance there, not like a false positive if you're looking at 1 or something.
That's right. Our probability actually goes up. And that's what we're talking about here, the probability and a confidence that these weak signals come together. Data fabric, not just for detection, but for vulnerabilities and looking at things. So it's not just, I know that there is a vulnerability on this system, but I also know that this system happens to be open to the internet. Therefore, the context of knowing those 2 things makes this a much higher priority than the same kind of vulnerability on a system that is completely air-gapped, as example, and not trying to plug the previous conversation there.
When you do this, you start to inform enterprise risk, at least from a cybersecurity dimension. So is there a play here for greater risk quantification and how that gets packaged to the CISO and the board?
Right, and that's exactly what Avalor did, looking and saying, hey, vulnerability analysis is a great way to use all the data that we have in context and say, this is really where you need to focus and spend your time. This is your highest priority to work on. But we could do this in other places. One of the interesting things that we've talked about quite a bit is some of our Risk 360 and business insights, which is harvesting the information that you're generating. So an organization generates on traffic, interactivity, and things, and looking at it from a lens of where's the risk? How does this compare to others in my industry and things? Avalor allows us to plug in a lot more data. So we get a much more fidelity on what we're looking at. And that especially includes third parties. So things that are not Zscaler products, are not formatted and not looking like Zscaler data, we have a way to be able to pull them in and start to make a much richer evaluation.
So if you had Zscaler digital experience, would you also be able to pull in the telemetry data being collected from that solution into Avalor as part of this data set?
Absolutely. The Zscaler's own data, we've already made a lot of work to try and push all of our data into a common lake and those sorts of things, but would be able to bring in data from endpoint telemetry. If your service provider had its own system of alerts and things, whether it's for a SaaS application or the network, like a network service provider, potentially be able to bring those pieces in to you as well. Vulnerability analysis, so Qualys, Rapid7, Tenable, these kinds of vendors who have really unique perspective, by the way, pretty valuable by itself, but to put it in the context of everything else that's going on, that's largely what Avalor started to do, and would be able to expand and build out on that quite a bit.
Anything else about Avalor that we haven't covered that you think is important for our audience to know?
I think this is one of those, let's build a couple of, using the concepts in the larger data fabric that's in place, let's build a few use cases that by themselves are worth investing in and expect more and more and more to come out from that in the future. And I think the interesting piece will be, and Zscaler already has a very rich ecosystem of other security vendors, other networking vendors, identity vendors that partner and work with us, but them bringing their own ideas in. It doesn't have to all be Zscaler ideas. We don't have to control everything with this. As a matter of fact, it doesn't serve our customers to do that way, but to be able to take advantage of some of these things, we'd absolutely like to see a little bit more of that.
A rich ecosystem could lead to more innovation, more insights to raise all of us up, right, in this battle. So let's go back to RSA Conference. Say you're back here and it's 2025. What do you hope to see?
I would like to see more maturity on some of these AI-enabled use cases that right now it sounds good and it's kind of a concept. I want to see reliability, repeatability. This works every single time in and out. So that's not super exciting per se, but it's super operational. It's something that I can take and I can use, and it really goes. And I'm not the beta tester for some startup that's coming up with, or the beta tester for a vendor. And by the way, we love to have our customers come and work with us, and we love design partners, and we appreciate and respect that, and try to support that as best we can. But I also recognize sometimes I just want to have the things that I can rely on and kind of move forward. Yep. Your job is to come up with new security things. We just want the benefit of that. So
absolutely. We've been listening to Nat Smith, the Senior Director of Product Management at Zscaler, and you can find more of his great ideas and advice on CXO Revolutionaries Insights. Nat, thanks for your time.
Thank you.
Thanks for listening to the CIO Evolution. Check back with your podcast provider regularly for more episodes. You can find more episodes along with other podcasts on the CXO Revolutionaries website at revolutionaries.zscaler.com. Statements by Zscaler podcasters and guests are informational only and should never be construed as legal advice. You should consult your legal advisor on matters related to you or your business. Zscaler makes no warranties, express, implied, or statutory as to the content of this podcast, and it is provided as is. Content on this podcast may contain forward-looking statements that are current as of the date of the recording and subject to change. These statements are subject to the safe harbor provisions created by the Private Securities Litigation Reform Act of 1995. Full legal disclaimers are available at revolutionaries.zscaler.com. Copyright 2021.